Elijah Carter could feel every eye in the room when Principal Whitfield sneered and thrust that battered guitar into his hands. "If you're too special to follow our rules, entertain us," she said, her cold smile sharper than any blade. At 6 feet 2 inches and standing tall in his thrift store blazer, Elijah's long fingers hovered over the strings, fingers that had coaxed melodies out of his old guitar late at night when pain kept him awake. In that moment, he was more exposed than ever. By the time he slipped into Mr. Peterson's history class 15 minutes late, the echo of mocking laughter still burned in his ears. A hush fell as he nodded a quiet apology and leaned against the chipped paint of the back wall. "Take your seat, Mr. Carter," Mr. Peterson barked, raising his voice so the whole class could hear. Elijah met his gaze with steady resolve. "My back," he began, but was cut off. "Your mysterious back injury that hadn't produced a single valid document," the teacher hissed, "isn't my problem." Whispers spread like wildfire. 3 doctors' notes had vanished. Each disappearance was another slap. He weighed his options. Sitting meant agony. 4 months ago, a broken chair had snapped under him, the crack echoing through the classroom and sparking weeks of pain. His jaw tightened. "I'll stand, sir. I can see the board just fine." Mr. Peterson's face turned crimson. "Principal's office, now." In the hallway, fluorescent lights flickered as James, his best friend, passed with a coach's hall pass. He offered Elijah a worried nod. No words could capture the sting of betrayal and isolation. Principal Whitfield's office was a shrine to her authority, awards gleaming under perfect lighting, family photos staged to soften her icy demeanor. The secretary barely looked up. "Have a seat," she droned. Elijah shook his head. "I prefer to stand." When Whitfield finally glanced up from her pristine desk, her blue eyes drilled into him. "Your mother can't keep sending paperwork that disappears. This fabricated injury is disrupting every class." Her words were venom wrapped in silk. "Detention after school. More disruptions means suspension." His shoulders sagged under the weight of being seen but never believed. That evening at home, Mrs. Alicia Carter sank into the worn kitchen chair, bills spread like a fortress on the table. Even in her nurse's scrubs, fatigue lined her face. "I'll mail the paperwork certified," she promised, voice breaking. Elijah managed a small nod, hiding the fire raging through his back. Later, in his bedroom painted a hopeful sky blue, his battered guitar waited. He pressed his fingers to the strings, and a melody poured out, complex, defiant, aching. A text from James blinked. "This is so unfair. Coach Williams is trying to help." For a moment, the world outside faded, and he was just a young man with music in his soul. Not a wounded body or a black kid constantly under suspicion, a sick. By dawn, that melody had sharpened into a roar of resilience. Down the hall, Principal Whitfield convened an impromptu teachers' meeting. Budget cuts, test scores, or the incident no one could ignore. Elijah Carter's story was about to collide with each unimpressed adult in that room. And the moment he'd stand and play would change everything. Elijah Carter could feel the tension crackling in the teacher's lounge the moment Principal Whitfield swept in, her stilettos clicking like a judge's gavel. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she said, dropping her leather portfolio onto the pristine oak table as if it carried the weight of every punishment ever handed out. "I've called this meeting to address a recurring issue with one of our students that's affecting multiple classes." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room until it landed on Elijah, unseen, unnamed, standing as always against the back wall. Mr. Peterson sat up straighter. "Elijah Carter." Whitfield nodded once, sharply, as if that single name carried the whole story. She laid out the accusations with the precision of a prosecutor. 5 teachers had filed complaints about his refusal to sit. Ms. Reynolds, arms folded, leaned back in her chair and let out a soft laugh. "He's been doing this in my class for months," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Claims he has some kind of back injury that mysteriously appeared after he was in my room last semester." A few teachers exchanged embarrassed glances, but before anyone else could speak, the door swung open and Coach Williams filled the frame. His broad shoulders seemed to push the air aside. "There's nothing mysterious about his injury," he said, voice low but firm. "I saw it happen. Ms. Reynolds pushed him back into his seat. The chair snapped. I filed an incident report that same day." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Whitfield's lips tightened into a thin line. "Coach Williams, if you had concerns about a student injury, the proper channel would have been through the nurse and my office," she replied, her voice so quiet that the words felt like ice crystals falling on a fire. "Which is exactly what I did," he answered, eyes never leaving hers. "Just like his mother did. 3 times. Funny how all that paperwork keeps disappearing, isn't it?" Several teachers shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact with each other. The accusation hung heavy in the air, and it felt to Elijah as though every one of them was silently agreeing that a black boy's word was worth nothing. Whitfield's next words were chilling in their calmness. "That's a serious allegation, Coach. One I suggest you don't repeat outside this room without evidence." Her steel-blue gaze dared him to defy her. He didn't blink. "Fine," he said, "then let's stick to facts. Elijah Carter has a 3.7 GPA despite chronic back pain. He has never once been disciplinary trouble until this standing situation. His mother works double shifts, saving lives at Memorial Hospital. She provided medical documentation 3 separate times. Miss Parker, the music teacher, cleared her throat. "He stands in my class too," she said quietly, "but I've never found it disruptive. He contributes more than most of my seated students." Whitfield's jaw clenched. "The issue isn't personal preference, Miss Parker," she said icily. "It's maintaining consistent expectations across all classrooms." Coach Williams bristled. "Even at the expense of a student's well-being?" he shot back. Whitfield gathered her papers with deliberate grace. "I'll be addressing this directly with Mr. Carter today," she announced, her tone final. "In the meantime, I expect all of you to maintain classroom discipline according to school policy. That is all." The meeting broke up like a wounded animal scattering, and Elijah felt every head turn away as if he'd contaminated the room by existing. When the other teachers left, Coach Williams lingered behind and caught Miss Parker's eye. He leaned in and asked in a softer voice, "You have him in music class, right? 5th period?" She nodded. He studied her face. "Does he seem interested in music beyond the curriculum?" She considered this. "He knows theory better than most who've had formal lessons." He nodded slowly. There might be more to Elijah Carter than any of us realize. She watched him go, her brow furrowed, as if the coach's belief in Elijah was a spark that refused to die. 2 hours later, Elijah found himself outside Whitfield's office again. His shoulders ached, his back a live wire of pain, but the weight in his chest was far heavier. This time there was no teacher referral on the note, just a plain slip of paper that said Principal's Office, 2 p.m. When he entered, Miss Reynolds was already there, leaning against the credenza with a look of triumph. Whitfield didn't bother with greetings. "Mr. Carter," she began, voice flat. "Miss Reynolds has concerns about statements you've apparently been making regarding that incident in her classroom last semester." Elijah's heart thudded against his ribs. "I haven't been making statements about anything," he said, his voice catching. Ms. Reynolds spat. "None of them are corroborating your story. Nobody wants to risk their grades by crossing me." Elijah's throat tightened. Whitfield's voice was colder than a morgue. "This is your final warning. Provide legitimate medical documentation by tomorrow morning, or you will sit in your assigned seat in every class. Continued defiance will result in suspension, is that clear?" He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." He turned to leave and heard Miss Reynolds sneer. "These kids think they can manipulate the system with sob stories and excuses. It's pathetic." Each step away from that office was a dagger twisting deeper into his pride. By the time Elijah slipped into his next class, his back was on fire and his spirit felt hollowed out. He leaned against the back wall as the teacher launched into a lecture, the chalk screeching against the board like fingernails on skin. Texting his mother, he typed, "Mom, don't bother with another note, they've made up their minds." Her reply came instantly, "I'm fighting this with you, baby, don't give up." He tucked the phone away and tried to breathe. Finally, music class. Miss Parker's room was his refuge. Warm light, soft carpet, the gleaming black piano in the corner. Today she led the students through chord progressions, effortlessly weaving history and feeling into every note. She spoke of blues music's journey from the cotton fields of the Deep South to smoky juke joints, how suffering was transformed into art. Elijah's fingers itched to tap out rhythms against his leg, to let the pain fuel something beautiful. Then, without warning, the door swung open and Principal Whitfield marched in, her presence sucking the warmth from the room. Her heels clicked like a metronome, counting down his humiliation. "Miss Parker, apologies for the interruption," she said, but her tone was anything but sorry. "We have a situation that needs addressing immediately." The students stilled, their curious eyes flicking between the piano and Elijah. Whitfield scanned the room until her gaze locked onto him. "It has come to my attention that certain students believe they deserve special treatment. Standing in class while everyone else follows normal procedures is disruptive and disrespectful." 27 pairs of eyes turned to Elijah. He felt the heat rise to his cheeks as every heartbeat pounded in his ears. She stepped closer and spoke directly to him. "Mr. Carter, I spoke with our school nurse about your claimed back injury. Without proper documentation, there is no medical reason you cannot sit like everyone else." Elijah's hands clenched at his sides. "Ma'am, I've tried to provide documentation." "Excuses?" she cut in sharply. A few students snickered. James, seated near the front, half stood, ready to defend him, but Elijah shook his head. This was his battle alone. Whitfield's gaze swept the room and fixed on the guitar resting against the wall. Her lips curved into a mocking smile. "Since standing is so important to you, Mr. Carter," she said, lifting the guitar with deliberate slowness, "perhaps you have other special talents that justify your exceptional treatment." She handed him the instrument, like a judge tossing a last chance at mercy. Elijah stared at the battered guitar in her hand. This instrument was his sanctuary, where pain dissolved into melody. Now it was a prop in his public shaming. The room held its breath as she urged, "Show us these special talents of yours." He lifted the guitar with trembling fingers, the weight of every sneer and every dismissive glance pressing down on him. The silence stretched until it felt like thunder. Finally, his fingers hovered over the strings. He could play better than any of them expected, but to do so would be to hand them the power to laugh or to believe him. In that charged moment, he tasted revenge on his tongue, sweeter than any note he could ever strike. Elijah Carter stood in the doorway of Miss Parker's fifth-room music room, heart pounding like a drum in an empty gym. Every face turned toward him, curiosity and excitement shining in their eyes. He gripped his guitar case with sweaty fingers and forced himself to breathe. He imagined that old broken chair waiting outside, the one Ms. Reynolds had pushed him into, the one that had cracked and turned his back into a furnace. He swallowed the memory and stepped inside, counting each echo of his footsteps on the tile floor as if they were notes in a symphony. Ms. Parker closed her sheet music folder and gave him a warm smile. Classroom lights felt softer than the harsh fluorescence in the hall. She said in a gentle voice, "Today we have a special performance. Whenever you are ready, Elijah." His throat went dry, and he felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes on his back, gossip and anticipation mixing in the hush. He placed the case on a chair and unfolded his own guitar, the one his uncle left him when he was 10. He settled on the stool in front of the blackboard, where chords and scales were scribbled in chalk. He positioned the guitar on his thigh, tuning it precisely by ear, each string a lifeline to the music that carried him through dark nights. A single tap on the microphone stand from Miss Parker signaled him to begin. His fingers hovered over the steel strings, and he felt the room shift, like all the oxygen had gathered in his lungs. He closed his eyes and struck the first chord. The melody rose, soft and delicate, a whisper of resilience. His calloused fingertips found the notes he had spent months perfecting. He thought of his mother working double shifts at Memorial Hospital, of Coach Williams's steady belief, of James's unwavering loyalty. He thought of Miss Reynolds's shove and Principal Whitfield's mocking smile. All of it poured into each note, each bend of the string more powerful than any protest sign. His music grew richer, weaving pain and hope into a tapestry of sound. As the song built, the room felt smaller, confined by the emotion hanging in the air. Students who once snickered now sat silent, some with tears glistening. Even Ms. Parker's lips trembled as she pressed her hands together. The melody shifted into a faster rhythm, his right hand strumming with precision, his left hand dancing on the fretboard like it had a life of its own. Every eye was riveted, every heartbeat synchronized to his rhythm. When he hit the chorus, the part he called Standing Tall, his voice joined in, soft, soulful, tinged with raw vulnerability, lyrics about scars that never show, about bending but never breaking, about finding courage in every step. His tone carried the weight of every humiliation he'd endured. Each word was a declaration of self-worth, each note a refusal to be silenced. The laughter and sneers melted away, replaced by awe and respect. By the time he reached the final stanza, his fingers moved faster and his voice soared. The last chord rang out and he let it hang, the resonance vibrating through the walls. For a fleeting moment, the world was still. Then an eruption of applause filled the room, starting softly, then swelling into a standing ovation. Chairs scraped back as students rose to their feet. Miss Parker led the applause, tears shining in her eyes. Even James stood, clapping so hard his palms stung. Elijah opened his eyes to see Principal Whitfield at the doorway, her portfolio clutched in one hand, her lips parted in shock. Her impeccably styled blonde hair no longer seemed as flawless. For the first time she looked uncertain. Her cool authority, the kind that had crushed so many students, faltered. Teachers across the aisle exchanged nervous glances. Whitfield's mouth opened but no words came. She had handed him a weapon of humiliation, not realizing his talent was the very thing that would disarm her. Students began to chant Elijah's name. His face warmed not in embarrassment, but with pride. He felt the collective energy of a school witnessing the triumph of an underdog. His music had done what protests and complaints could not. It had broken through prejudice and made them listen. Principal Whitfield swallowed hard, stepping back as if retreating from a force she could not control. She turned and closed the door quietly, her heels clicking like a defeated heartbeat in the corridor. In the aftermath, the classroom buzzed with praise and congratulations. Ms. Parker hugged him as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. James slapped him on the back, nearly knocking the guitar out of his hands. Whispers of how powerful his performance was spread like wildfire through the halls. Even Coach Williams, who sat in the back with a wide grin, gave him a proud nod. Elijah realized he had done more than play music. He had rewritten the narrative of who he was. Word reached the principal's office too. By the end of the day, the rumor was that Principal Whitfield had called an emergency meeting with the school board to reconsider her stance on Elijah's medical accommodation and to discuss how they had mishandled the entire situation. Teachers who once complained about consistency now admitted they misunderstood his needs. The narrative shifted from defiance to resilience, from disruption to inspiration. That evening, when Elijah returned home, his mother's tired face blossomed with pride at the sound of his guitar case. He told her about the standing ovation, about the principal's stunned silence, about how his music had turned their shame into something far grander. Alicia Carter hugged him tight and said, "You stood tall, baby. You showed them who you are, and they had no choice but to listen." Elijah Carter's victory was not just about one song. It was about reclaiming his dignity, exposing prejudice, and delivering a performance that no one could ever forget. He had turned a tool of humiliation into his superpower, and in doing so, he had delivered the sweetest revenge imaginable, one note at a time. Elijah Carter stood frozen as Principal Whitfield's triumphant smile filled the music room. He set the guitar back on its stand, voice barely a whisper when he said, "I'm sorry, I can't." Her laugh echoed like a verdict. "Next time you'll sit at a desk like everyone else," she declared, "unless you prefer suspension." The door clicked behind her, leaving Elijah stranded in a sea of silent faces. He didn't wait for the final bell. Each hallway step pressed humiliation deeper into his spine. He ignored James's calls as he walked out without permission. For the first time since the chair broke under him, he left school early, careless about consequences. Pain blazed with every stride, but it was nothing beside the burn of being mocked in front of dozens. At home, Elijah closed himself in his bedroom, His mother, Alicia Carter, found him hours later, eyes rimmed red. James had texted non-stop. "Where are you?" Whitfield was way out of line. "Mateus, sorry," he corrected himself in his head. Elijah dropped onto the bed. "I'm done, Mum," he muttered. "I'm thinking about dropping out." She sat beside him in her scrubs, all the fatigue of a double shift in her posture. "Don't you dare," she said firmly. "I can get you a GD, but walking away means she wins. You're worth more than her rules." Her voice shook with fierce pride. He realized she understood every bruise, every dismissal. A knock sounded on the front door. James burst in, backpack slung carelessly, eyes bright. "Man, I had to see you," he said. He sat on Elijah's desk chair, leaning forward. "That guitar of yours is your superpower. Whitfield handed you a cape and told you to wipe your face with it. It's on you now." Elijah let James's words settle. He lifted his chin and nodded. He would fight back, but on his terms. That evening, he met Ms. Parker in the empty music room. She hugged him before he could speak. "Let's get you ready," she said. They scheduled afternoon rehearsals and began refining Standing, his original piece about resilience. Returning to classes the next day was agony. 20 minutes sitting felt like torture. Principal Whitfield passed him in the hall with a smug, "Nice to see you following the rules, Mr. Carter." He swallowed, imagining the cheers he'd earn soon. After school, he poured himself into practice. Miss Parker taught him notation and structure while James offered feedback between riffs. One afternoon, she mentioned Marcus Harris, a famous alumnus and competition judge. Elijah's heart raced at the thought of playing for someone who shaped stars. That night, Alicia delivered news over dinner. The school board contacted Whitfield. "They've seen the statements from Coach Williams and me. They know about the paperwork disappearing." Elijah stared at his plate, disbelief settling into cautious hope. The next morning, Ms. Parker joined him in Whitfield's office. The principal, seated behind her desk, kept a neutral face. "Mr. Carter, it's come to my attention there may have been an oversight in your medical documentation," she began. Elijah's breath caught. For the first time, the system acknowledged his struggle. Elijah left that meeting with new resolve. He had his proof, his music, and an army behind him. No more hiding. He would stand tall, both in class and on stage, until every note rang with the power of his truth. Elijah Carter sat stiffly beside Miss Parker in Principal Whitfield's office, the late morning sun slanting through the blinds like accusing eyes. Whitfield cleared her throat and admitted in that clipped, rehearsed way she had perfected over the years that proper protocols weren't followed when his medical paperwork vanished. She said she acknowledged that accommodations should have been made for his condition. It wasn't a real apology, but from Diane Whitfield, it was as close as he'd ever get. She went on to mention the regional Young Composers competition. The school board was suddenly very interested in his talent, she said, because they wanted to showcase the arts program to donors. Elijah felt his stomach twist. It wasn't concern for him at all. It was a chance to raise money, polish the school's reputation, buy more plaques for her wall. Whitfield fixed him with a stern look. His standing in class would remain an exception only because of his back injury, and he was expected to behave perfectly in every other way. Our school's reputation, she reminded him, would be riding on his performance. Ms. Parker spoke up quietly. Elijah's academic record was spotless, she said. He'd never caused trouble, until this one issue. Whitfield gave a polite nod, but didn't soften her tone. As Elijah and Ms. Parker left the office, she shook her head in disbelief. It wasn't gratitude that drove Whitfield's newfound courtesy, she said. It was self-interest. And sometimes, that's how change happens. You take the wins where you can. Over the next few weeks, Elijah poured himself into practice. Every afternoon he stayed late in the music room, where Miss Parker set up recording equipment so he could critique his own performance. She praised his raw technical skill, remarkable for someone with no formal lessons, but warned him not to lose the emotional honesty that made Rising, his retitled piece, so compelling. At home, calluses formed on his fingertips, and his mother would sit in the doorway, tears glinting in her eyes as she listened. "You're going to win this thing," she told him one night. "Then they'll all know what I've known all along. My son is extraordinary." A week before the competition, Principal Whitfield made an unexpected appearance during one of Elijah's late rehearsals. She hovered by the door, arms folded, and waited until he finished a full playthrough of Rising. When he set the guitar down, she said briskly that the school board had arranged for a photographer to document his performance. They were quite invested in his success, she told him. Elijah managed a polite nod. As soon as she left, he let out a long breath. It felt like he was a pawn in her publicity game. Ms. Parker beamed. "Marcus, this is Elijah Carter." Harris extended his hand and Elijah shook it without dropping the guitar. "May I listen to your composition?" Harris asked. Elijah's heart thundered, but he remembered his mother's words. This was his chance to show who he really was. "I'd be honored, sir," he said, settling into the stool. As he played, the world fell away. His back ached less than his pride had before. He felt every note, every chord a testament to every time he'd been pushed down. When the final note faded, Harris sat in silence, then nodded. "Thank you for sharing that," he said softly. "I look forward to tomorrow." He turned to Miss Parker. "You've got something special here." Elijah held his breath until the door clicked behind Harris. Then he exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. The morning of the competition arrived in a rush of nerves and excitement. Elijah was packing his guitar when his mother's phone rang. She answered with her usual calm, and then her eyes widened. "Yes, thank you. We'll be there." She hung up and turned to him. "The superintendent is calling a special meeting before you leave." Elijah felt his throat tighten. Had they uncovered more problems? As the first performer began, Elijah closed his eyes for a moment and centered himself. The tension in his back didn't disappear, but it no longer mattered. His story would be told through melody, and no one could deny his voice. When it was his turn, he would step onto that stage, not as the kid who stood silent in the back, but as Elijah Carter, composer and survivor, ready to claim every note he'd earned. Elijah Carter took a deep breath as he walked onto the stage, guitar in hand. The grand auditorium lights felt like spotlights on every insecurity he'd carried for months. In the front row, his mother wiped tears from her cheeks. James and a handful of classmates leaned forward, eager to show their support. Principal Whitfield sat stiffly beside school board members, her expression unreadable. The judges, including Marcus Harris in the center, watched with polite curiosity. Elijah's heart pounded so loudly he feared it would drown out his opening chord. He planted his feet, gripped the neck of his guitar, and announced, "My piece is called Rising. It's about finding your voice when the world tries to silence it." His voice was calm, but inside he felt the fire of every humiliation. Being shoved into a broken chair, dismissed by teachers, denied paperwork. He struck the first chord, letting the sound fill the vast hall. The rich resonance seemed to sweep away the memory of Principal Whitfield's mocking grin and Miss Reynolds's cold dismissal. As his fingers danced across the strings, the melody shifted from soft and tentative to bold and defiant. He thought of his mother working double shifts, waking before dawn so he could pursue this moment. He felt James's unwavering faith, Coach Williams's late testimony, and Miss Parker's gentle encouragement. Every note became a declaration. He would not be erased. The auditorium air shimmered with his story, pain transformed into beauty, prejudice countered by perseverance. When he reached the triumphant chorus, the crowd seemed to lean in, collectively holding its breath. His fingers flew, weaving technical precision with raw emotion. The final chord rang out and held, vibrating through every wooden pew. For a heartbeat, there was perfect silence. Then applause erupted, building from polite claps to a roaring ovation. His mother stood, sobbing with pride. Classmates rose in unified cheer. Even Principal Whitfield stood, her composed facade cracking as wonder softened her features. Backstage, competitors patted him on the shoulder, their congratulations a blur of warmth. On stage, the coordinator announced winners. Third, Emily Chen. Second, Jacob Martinez. And first, Rising by Elijah Carter. The auditorium shook with cheers. Marcus Harris rose from his seat to shake Elijah's hand, leaning in to say, "That wasn't just music, son. That was a statement. See me afterward." We need to talk about your future." 1 month later, Elijah stood at the back of the school auditorium during a special assembly. His trophy from the competition gleamed beside a newspaper clipping about his scholarship to the State University's music program. Principal Whitfield approached the podium, voice subdued. She formally apologized for the school's failures. Lost medical documentation, a missed incident report, and insensitive handling of his injury. She announced new protocols to protect every student's needs and ensure their voices are heard. As she concluded, she invited Elijah forward. Guitar in hand, he stepped onto the stage amid sustained applause. He faced the audience, teachers who once doubted him, classmates who once ignored him, and Principal Whitfield watching with quiet respect. "I'd like to play something for you," he said. "It's called Standing." The first notes rang clear and true, not as a plea for accommodation, but as a celebration of strength and a reminder that every silenced voice deserves to be heard.